Now, if you want a budget smartphone that can keep going all weekend long, just like your mum, then the Motorola Moto G9 Power has got to be up there near the top of your list with its mighty 6,000 mAh battery. Although, of course, there are plenty of other rival budget blows, the likes of the Poco M3, which also sport massive capacity cells these days. So to see if the Motorola Moto G9 Power was up to snuff, I've been using it as my full-time smartphone for the past few days for this in-depth review. You can grab it right now from the likes of Carphone Warehouse, John Lewis, all the usual peeps for around 179 quid at the time I shot this video. So here's all you need to know, and for more of the latest greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now, the first thing you'll undoubtedly notice about the Moto G9 Power when you pluck it out of its lovely little box is the fact that it is one heavy mofo. This is a proper heffalump of a smartphone, people. 221 grams. It's almost as hefty as the likes of the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra. So certainly if you want something that's going to be nice and lightweight, you're going to have to look elsewhere. Luckily, there are plenty of lightweight budget smartphones out there, so just go check out any of the others I've reviewed pretty much. Like pretty much every budget blow around this price point, you've got a plastic finish around back, and you can grab it in either electric violet or metallic sage. This sage model of the G9 Power isn't exactly going to make you giddy with excitement, but this isn't an ugly smartphone either. You've got a slightly textured back end there. It's quite a subtle pattern, but it does help with the grip, especially as it's such a hefty beast. It also helps to prevent any greasy finger marks and stuff like that from coating that back end every time you pluck it out of your pocket, your bag, whatever. And the Motorola Moto G9 Power also proved plenty durable over these last few weeks, where I've had it knocking about the house in the last few days where I've been using it full time as my smartphone. Got one tiny little scuff down here at the bottom, which I'm not even sure I'll be able to capture it on camera, to be honest. And Motorola has added its usual splash resistant coating to the Moto G9 Power as well, so spills aren't a problem, nor is using it out in, a bit of a typical British winter drizzle. So as far as the design goes, Motorola's not exactly going to win any awards for being particularly exciting or innovative here, and it is a big chunky hefty mofo, but apart from that, all good. Now, as for the actual software running on the Motorola Moto G9 Power, well, unfortunately this bad boy is still on Android 10, which is a bit of a shame. It is on the Android 11 updates list if you go to Motorola's blog, but unfortunately they're a bit vague when it comes to the timelines. They've basically said it's coming soon, and if you scroll a bit further down it says in the coming months. So while it is down to get Android 11, I certainly wouldn't hold your breath, otherwise you'll be dead as shit, basically. But you do get that usual lovely stock Android finish with the Motorola experiences chucked on top to add bonus features as well. Now, I'm a big fan of the Moto experiences here. It makes it really easy to customize your smartphone for one. So if you're not particularly used to Android, you'll find it really easy to change the grid sizes on your desktops, change the icon colors, all kinds of stuff. But the one feature that I really loved that Motorola put on all of its previous smartphones that seems to have culled now for the most recent handsets like the G9 Power is that one-handed mode. For some reason that seems to have completely disappeared, and that particular feature would have come in really handy here on the Moto G9 Power, which obviously is an absolute unit, but at least you can, for instance, drag down that notifications bar from anywhere on screen, which definitely comes in helpful too. And of course you've got all those classic Moto experience gesture shortcuts as well, such as the fantastic karate chop to turn the torch on, which has got to be the best feature on here. It's functional and it makes you feel like a badass. At least for one fleeting moment, until I stare in the mirror and remember that I'm just a scrawny, bald, pasty little arse biscuit. And you've also got the wrist twist to open up the camera, which, as I mention every time, is increasingly difficult once you get into my sort of age and the old arthritis starts kicking in. And for the Moto G9 Power, Motorola actually added in a new gesture as well, which is really, really good. It's called swipe to split. So basically, if you've got an app open, all you need to do is swipe across the display and back again, like so, and this allows you to split your screen quickly and easily. Now, one feature I've seen in a lot of budget Motorola and Nokia smartphones lately is this dedicated Google Assistant button, which is absolutely unnecessary as usual here on the G9 Power. Like seriously, there are more than enough ways to call up the Google Assistant without having to have a dedicated button on there. I mean, for one, you just need to swipe from either of the bottom corners and it does exactly the same thing. So it certainly feels like that button is completely redundant. I certainly can't think of any proper full-on uses for it. And the annoying thing is you can't disable it or remap it either. The only way of actually disabling it is by just stopping the Google app entirely from running in the background in the settings menu. But the good news is that here on the G9 Power, I didn't find myself accidentally pressing that button when I was like fumbling it out of my pocket, something like that, which I have had with some other smartphones, so at least it wasn't a pain in the arse, I guess. You've got a rear-mounted fingerprint sensor on the back end of the Moto G9 Power, and that does its job perfectly fine. You've also got face recognition to back it up as well, and again, that works all right as long as the lighting isn't too dodgy, otherwise it can take its sweet time or fail entirely. It's pretty standard stuff for a budget blow, to be perfectly honest. You've You've also got NFC support on the Moto G9 Power, and you've got a very respectable 128 gigs of internal storage, which could be expanded via micro SD memory cards up to a further 512 gigs. So whatever crazy shit you want to download, you want to stack this full of movies, music, whatever, you are sorted. Now let's have a squint at that 6.8-inch Max Vision display, which is certainly an absolute beast, although it is just a standard HD plus resolution, while many sub £200 rivals like the Poco M3, the Redmi Note 9T, etc. have full HD screens. And with the display this size, you can definitely notice, especially if you put it side by side with any of those rivals I just mentioned, that the visuals aren't quite as crisp. But that's certainly not to say that the Moto G9 Power has a bad display, it's just that the clarity can be a little bit fuzzy at times. You lack some of that sharper detail, but I'd still happily kick back with a bit of Netflix, watch an entire movie on this thing, no worries. The Moto G9 Power does suffer from the usual budget smartphone foibles, though, so for instance, sometimes that adaptive brightness can act a little bit drunk and it can just kind of do its own thing, so you'll have to dive in there and manually sort it out. And that maximum brightness could also be a little bit stronger as well when you're using it outdoors. The viewing angles could be wider as well, but it's typical sort of budget complaints. Apart from that, you know, the colours are reasonably poppy for an IPS panel, and as I say, overall, it's fine. As for the audio, well, that is pumped out of a single mono speaker housed here on the bottom edge of the Moto G9 Power. Not particularly great, it's quite tinny when you get it on that top volume, but thankfully you do get an actual headphone jack, which is always great. Otherwise you can stream to Bluetooth. I had no problems whatsoever streaming music, video, whatever, to a pair of Bluetooth headphones or a Bluetooth speaker. Now when it comes to the performance, what you've got stuffed in here is Qualcomm's Snapdragon 662 chipset backed by 4 gigs of RAM. Now, I found that the everyday running was generally smooth. I did occasionally have to wait a while for the camera to load up, and I also noticed a bit of a pause when flipping between the different camera features. That was my main grumble with this thing. Usually, you know, loading up other apps is just a case of tapping, you're basically straight in, nice and nippy. And that Adreno 610 GPU means you can get gaming done on this thing as well. Bit of Call of Duty Mobile plays just fine on those lower detail settings, and the screen is just about responsive enough to keep you competitive, as long as you're not playing anyone too good. I certainly found that its gaming prowess was just as good as most other budget smartphones around this sort of price point. But of course the highlight, the true marvel of the Moto G9 Power is its battery life, thanks to that mighty 6,000 milliamp hours, a match for the likes of the Poco M3. Of course, Motorola had to boost it up to around the 6,000 milliamp mark because it already stuffed a 5,000 milliamp battery into the standard G9 Play and G9 Plus. I'll tell you what, coming to this thing from the Samsung Galaxy S21 was like inhaling a massive, wonderful breath of fresh, minty air, because the S21, I'd struggle to get it to last until I went to bed at the end of just one single day. This thing will easily last 2 days, generally around 10 to 12 hours of screen on time, even with plenty of use. That's playing with the camera, media streaming apps, good bit of Skyping and stuff, which usually kills other phones dead pretty damn quick. Definitely wonderful stuff. And when it does finally get drained, you've got that Turbo Power 20 tech to charge it back up again. Not particularly swift, got to say, but it's absolutely fine. I'll leave it plugged in for a couple of hours, and you'll basically get a full charge. So let's finish up this Motorola Moto G9 Power review with a gander at that triple lens rear camera, headed up by a 64 megapixel quad pixel primary lens. Unfortunately, the rest of that setup isn't particularly thrilling. You've got your basic depth sensor on there, and of course you've got a macro lens, because why wouldn't you? It's like fins on a fish. You can't get a budget smartphone without a goddamn macro lens. And Motorola has spruced up its camera UI and made it easier to use one-handed now, although there is still some redundancy, like you can toggle the timer and the flash in the main screen, or also by pulling out this mini menu. Now, as I mentioned before, that camera UI can be a little bit lethargic at times, especially when you're swapping between different modes, going into like the night vision mode, stuff like that. But apart from that, it is absolutely fine. As for the actual photo results, well, the Moto G9 Power captures pics at 12 megapixel resolution by default, using 4-in-1 pixel binning just to brighten up and fine-tune your overall shot. But if you do want to crank it up all the way to the maximum 64 megapixel mode, well, that is perfectly possible. Although I've got to say, I often found that this did not produce more detailed shots at all, and it often messed up the color temperature of your final pic as well, so to be honest, I just skip it. Now, most budget phones at this price point offer fairly basic photo capture, and the Moto G9 Power isn't really much different, often struggling with strong or low lighting. Too much sun and your photos often look saturated, too dark and the focus will struggle, and even when it does manage to latch onto your subject, you'll still end up with a grainy shot. But But the Moto G9 Power did do a pretty respectable job for a budget blower in HDR situations, and you'll still manage to get some good looking family pics if your subject isn't hopping around like a March hare pumped full of steroids. The camera AI can flash up helpful suggestions for improving your shot, like swapping to the likes of the night mode or that portrait mode. And the portrait mode is proper decent, adding a scalable bit of bokeh action to the background and really helping your subject to look lush. And in low light, that night mode can help to brighten things up a wee bit, as long as once again that focus doesn't crap out on you. But it really does only make a marginal difference, to be fair. You got quite a few other bonus modes thrown in here by Motorola as well, including that old reliable spot color, which can pump out some very artistic shots. And you've also got a pro mode on here as well, so you can meddle around with the settings to some degree and get a different kind of shot. And yeah, there's that gosh darn macro mode, which can be used to take fuzzy looking washed out 2 megapixel photos of things up close, if that's going to set your world on fire. Now swap to video and you can capture footage at full HD level at either 30 or 60 frames per second. There is no 4K option here. And I was really disappointed, I gotta say. I noticed that the focus really struggled at times, even when the lighting wasn't particularly dodgy. So some of my clips were basically good for the bin and nothing else, just endless popping of that lens. Go home, focus, just go home, you are drunk. My indoor videos also looked really soft, and basically if you're looking to shoot a load of home movies, you'll want to get another phone, just not this one. Nope. You've also got a 16 megapixel selfie cam, and that's absolutely fine, again, as long as the conditions aren't taxing. That night mode actually still works with a selfie cam, and it does help to brighten up that gorgeous face of yours. I'm talking about your face here, obviously, not this one here that you're looking at. Haggard, pale ass sack of wrinkle. And that right there is what I thought of the Motorola Moto G9 Power after using it as my full-time smartphone for several days. I've got to say, obviously it is a bit of a mixed bag. That camera, unfortunately, is a little bit troublesome, especially when it comes to shooting video. It's just hot garbage in that respect. The display isn't as strong as some rivals. You're still lingering on Android 10. Hopefully, I'll be getting Android 11 soon. But on the flip side, I did enjoy that stock Android experience. The performance is strong enough to do a simple bit of gaming on the side. And of course, you've got that excellent battery life, which is definitely the highlight. Now, if you're looking for a new budget smartphone, definitely go check out my roundup of the best sub £200 budget phones that you can get right now in 2021. And that'll give you a few more ideas of alternatives to the Moto G9 Power. If you've been using the G9 Power, it'd be great to hear your own personal experiences and thoughts down in the comments below. Please do poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you!